Well, Ambassador Huckabee, appreciate you taking the time to speak with us.
Thank you, Paul. Great to have you in Israel.
It's been a joy. So as we speak, IDF soldiers are continuing their momentum moving into Gaza. We haven't heard any response regarding the Hamas offer to free the hostages. Is that the right move right now? And if so, why?
It's hard to know what is the right move. I mean, the right move is Hamas surrenders, that they let the hostages go. It's what the president has been pushing for and saying. It's what Israel has been pushing for. Israel has tried it soft, now they're trying it hard. It's a tough call, but I don't know that they have much of a choice, because Hamas will walk up to the table and pretend they're going to make some type of deal that would let the hostages go, and then they always walk away, and then they add new conditions. I think people have to understand the reason this has gone on like it has, as long as it has, with as much suffering as it has, it's not because of Israel, it's because of Hamas. Israel would love for this to have ended on October the 8th of 2023, but Hamas stubbornly wants to inflict as much suffering as possible, not just on Israel. They don't mind inflicting suffering on their own people, which they have done.
Do you think perhaps Hamas is buying time, knowing that later this month the UN General Assembly will meet, and some states, some countries, UK, as well as Belgium and Canada, will, if they follow through on it, declare Palestine a sovereign state?
It could be. I think without a doubt, when these European countries started saying they were going to unilaterally declare a Palestinian state, Hamas walked away from all the negotiations that had been going on. And of course they would. In their minds, this is what they've been wanting. They wanted a Palestinian state. Now they might get one for free. They don't even have to give up. It was the most insane thing when the European countries did this. First of all, it's a violation of the Oslo Accords. So that's a problem. They can't declare a Palestinian state. They just can't do that. And they haven't defined where the boundaries are, who would lead it, how it would all work out. So it's really nonsensical. It's aspirational for Macron of France and these European leaders to demand this. But the fact is, it's not happening. And all they have done is empowered Hamas and emboldened them. They have really set back any type of de-escalation of tension between Israel and the Palestinian Authority. And they've kind of given Israel an incentive now to go and talk about declaring sovereignty over larger parts of Judea and Samaria. So I'm not sure what they thought they were going to accomplish, but what they are accomplishing is the polar opposite of what they say they want.
How does that muddy the waters then, if in fact they're declared a sovereign state? Now there's a quote-unquote invasion of a sovereign state. What does that look like? How do you work through that?
Well, there really can't be. There's no way, no mechanism that you can just suddenly declare there's a Palestinian state, because in order to do that, you have to have boundaries. You have to have some type of agreement. Unless you want to start a war, I don't think that's what they're talking about. So the whole thing makes no sense. That's why I say it's aspirational. It may be what they want to see happen. Maybe they believe if they say it to be so, it will be so, but it's not the way it works. And because it is a direct violation of the Oslo Accords, and here's what I mean by that. In Oslo, there has to be the participation and cooperation, not just of the Palestinian Authority, but of Israel. Well, Israel's not a part of this. And by the way, the U.S. isn't a part of it. We're going to veto anything at the UN if they try to bring it up, because this is an outrageous assault on the sovereignty of Israel, on the chronology of how anything like this should happen. So it is an exercise in futility, I think largely designed to give Emmanuel Macron some sense of relevancy, because his approval ratings in France are somewhere just south of an STD or the whooping cough. And I think he's looking at something to give him a little bit of a spotlight on the stage. But this is not the way it should be done, and I think it's disastrous in its effect.
President just put out a tweet yesterday he's saying, tell Hamas to immediately give back the hostages, not 2, not 5, not 7, and it will end. Do you think that could resonate? What are your thoughts about when he is saying, end this war, quote unquote? You know, what does that mean to you? What does that mean to the president?
He's been saying repeatedly, consistently, and with great clarity that two things had to happen. One, all the hostages come home, not some, all of them. And the second thing he said is that Hamas has no future in Gaza. They're going to have to leave. They can disarm, they can go into exile. And Israel has offered them an opportunity to go into exile. But what they can't do is stay in Gaza and have anything to do with the future of Gaza. To let them stay there would be as ridiculous as someone thinking that the Nazis could stay and have a role in governing Germany after World War II. Nobody would have thought that that was realistic, possible, or even rational. And it's that same message that the president has said with great clarity, and he's never wavered from that. And what he said yesterday is incredibly consistent with those clear demands. Give up the hostages and give up your arms. I don't think they maybe take him seriously. They might want to look at what he did when he kept telling Iran, you're not going to have a nuclear weapon, you're not going to enrich uranium, and they kind of ignored him till one Saturday night some B-2s showed up and kind of left a message for them.
The president has also said that Israel has, quote, is not winning the war of public opinion. There's a PR problem going on now in the United States, well, across the globe. How does that get countered? How do you fix that?
It's a challenge for Israel because the monolithic media is so against them. It's partly because the leftist slant of the media, but a lot of it is because Hamas, to their credit, and I don't want to give them any credit that they don't deserve, but in this case, they've controlled the message machine pretty well. Now, they've got a lot of people complicit with them. United Nations, who puts out whatever they say through the, quote, Gaza Health Ministry, that's Hamas. So they'll put out a news release, they'll issue numbers and stories. The NGOs will pick it up, give it to the UN. The UN then publishes it without verifying any of it. They'll say this is the latest news, and every network pretty much in the world will carry it as if it's so. Now, if it gets discredited, which it most of the time will in a day or two, every now and then you'll have the New York Times or the Washington Post or BBC pull back and retract their story, but they do it in such an obscure way that nobody knows that it got retracted. That's been a huge problem. So you have a combination of recklessly irresponsible media, adding to an anti-Semitic fever that is going on across the world, and far leftist lunatics out parading in the streets of the United States and across the world saying from the river to the sea, making ridiculous claims both about Israel committing genocide, which is absurd, and people believe it because they don't know any better. I tell people all the time, come to Israel, see things for yourself. The truth is a great antidote to the nonsense that is being spread on multi-fronts of media.
But you would think at least members of Congress would get this, understand, or at least investigate this. Yet, as we speak, the Israel lobby is, I wouldn't say deteriorating, but losing members. So how do you get them to understand, based on what you're saying, what's really happening here?
I hate to break this to you, Paul, but in the world of politics, a lot of people sort of follow the crowd. Not everybody has the courage to stand up and say, I disagree, and those are not the true facts. Because people in politics tend to look at a poll, and if the poll shows a trend going somewhere, rather than leading, they tend to be followers. And that's a real problem in politics globally. And I hate to say this about our American political system, but we have a lot of people that will govern by polling. It's one of the things I love about President Trump. He doesn't. He takes a stand. It may be incredibly unpopular according to the polls, but that's what makes him unique. He leads the discussion. He steers the conversation rather than being steered by the conversation.
We're even talking Jewish members here.
Yeah, and that's really troubling. You see people like Chuck Schumer, who is more afraid of his own shadow, and AOC, which is a shadow I wouldn't want to have, than he is his own convictions. You know, Chuck Schumer is saying things that are 180 degrees from what he said in his entire career. Jerry Nadler, who's Jewish, just announced he's not running again. Probably a good idea. But it's hard to understand why so many people who have been strong supporters of the U.S.-Israel relationship now are afraid of really some of the crazy people out screaming in the streets, and they're just folding like a cheap tent in a thunderstorm. And it's hard to understand why we don't have some more conviction that's based on fact, based on reality, rather than based on the propaganda that comes from the most savage group of people that have lived in our lifetime, Hamas.
You just recently said that, in fact, this week, that the pressure needs to be on Hamas, not Israel.
Yeah.
How do you get that done based on everything you just told me?
Well, I'll be the first to say I think Israel's got to do a better job of their own messaging. You know, they're fighting a real war against a very real enemy that's slaughtered, mutilated, massacred, and then butchered 1,200 of their people, took 250 hostages, has held them for 22 months, continued to torture them. And so their focus has been on getting their hostages back and dealing with this murderous group of monsters who murdered their people. So I don't think the messaging of it all has probably been their highest priority, but it's going to have to be, because they need to get the truth out and counteract some of the most vicious lies that have ever been told against the government. And that's one of the, I think, big challenges that they have.
If you were the PR consultant for them, what would you tell them?
I tell them to get a bunch of social media influencers, because the real problem is with Generation Z. That's where they're losing ground, and that then affects as it bubbles up to generations above. And unfortunately, we have a number of very loud, I don't think they represent a majority, but they're very loud and they're influential. These are voices in the U.S. that are primarily just raw isolationists, who will say, well, America first means America only. Well, it never has meant that. And the reason I say it is because President Trump authored the idea of America first, but it's never for him been America only. America first, absolutely. That our priorities are what's front and center. But we live in a real world where there are dangers. The enemies of Israel are the enemies of the United States. For 46 years, the Iranians have said death to Israel, then death to America. If you separate that, if you somehow think that we're not vulnerable, that we're not a target, then you haven't been listening for the past 46 years. Now, given Gen Z, they haven't been around that long. So they don't have the history of it. They don't understand it. But they listen to somebody on TikTok and suddenly they're well educated about the Middle East. And that's part of the challenge, is getting people to have a depth of understanding and look at things with the lights on.
Yeah, that came to reality when I saw a little video of a man in a dress with heels spraying, you know, Free Palestine,
Yeah.
you know, and you're thinking, okay, you obviously have no idea.
Well, and it's like the people who wear rainbow shirts and say Queers for Palestine. I'm thinking, why don't you walk around with that shirt in Gaza? See how long you last with that. I mean, there's a complete freedom of expression in Israel. People can be whoever they desire to be. You can't do that in not just Gaza, but in most Muslim countries. It'll get you killed. So it's a disconnect with reality that is very hard to understand.
We're moving upon the second anniversary of October 7th. In my opinion, and based on, I think, a lot of the media out there, that almost gets forgotten. It's sort of a boilerplate at the end of a news release.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, this is how it started. Part of the PR is reminding them, you can't really show what happened there, the grotesqueness of what happened. So how does that message get out and resonate that, oh yeah, that's why we're here?
It's one of the challenges that Israel has. If they showed the graphic footage from October 7th, which, by the way, was recorded by Hamas. People tend to forget that Hamas didn't just do these evil things. They were proud of it. So proud that they wore cameras on their helmets and recorded the butchering of pregnant women, babies, elderly people. They recorded it. And then they boasted of it. They called their parents while they were in the home of a Jewish family, having just slaughtered them with blood all over the walls, and called and said, Mom, Dad, I just killed 10 Jews. Aren't you proud of me? Who does that? This is sick. It's a level of evil that it's hard to even understand. For gosh sake, the Nazis at least tried to hide what they were doing when they were murdering 6 million Jews and 11 million people. They did their best to conceal what they were actually getting done. These are people who are quite proud of it and have boasted repeatedly that they want to do it again and again and again. That's why I say when people act like, well, Israel ought to be pressured to have a ceasefire. Ceasefire? For what? To keep the hostages held and starved and deprived and tortured? Again, it's irrational.
Let's talk about what's going on here when it specifically to the West Bank. So you met with the Israeli finance minister, and you have concerns about that. Explain that, and what did you say to him?
There's a stalemate that exists between the Palestinian Authority and the government of Israel on some financial issues, one of which is the remittance of tax money that Israel is holding. It is supposed to go back to the Palestinian Authority, but the Palestinian Authority was also supposed to comply with certain guidelines. For example, to stop payments to terrorists. They've been doing it forever. And they pay terrorists large sums of money for killing Jews. Now, it's against really any sense of propriety and morality to pay someone that will be a terrorist and kill a Jew. But they've been doing it. Hundreds of millions of dollars they've been paying out. If you kill a Jew, you get a park or a street named after you, or a soccer stadium. They've claimed that they're stopping that, but they haven't. They just route it through a welfare system, and it's still going on. That's a huge problem. So Israel has said, you're not doing what you promised you would do starting in 2017, so if you're not going to keep your end of the bargain, then we're going to hold the money. I'd like to see that relaxed, not because I want to see the Palestinian Authority rewarded. I'd like for them to do what they claim that they're going to do, and that's stop those payments to the terrorists. Stop the curriculum in the schools that teach kids as young as 6 and 7 years old that it's a wonderful thing to grow up and to kill Jewish people. You know, teaching anti-Semitism as a curriculum in the classroom, that's a very, very dangerous thing to put into a culture. But that's been going on for years. Those are things that are supposed to stop, but they haven't. If they would, I think Israel would relax some of the financial constraints. The concern that I have in what's been reported has been that, look, I think that there's a lot of horrible things that can happen if the PA completely collapses. It's not that I'm trying to be a champion for them, but if they financially collapse, people can't get paid. There's no economic activity. And by the way, already there's 35% unemployment. It's a terrible economy. If that all goes even further sideways, then you're at a place where desperate people do desperate things. What we don't want to see is a violent uprising within the PA where people are just angry because they can't feed their families. The fact is the PA could probably take immediate steps to bring some resolution. Instead, they've taken the opposite approach. They've continued what's called pay for slay. They've continued the curriculum. And now they're pushing for unilateral recognition of a Palestinian state. That further froze any of the negotiations that I was involved in, shuttling back and forth between Ramallah and Jerusalem, trying to get some resolution just to bring a level of economic activity, not to help the PA government, but to help the merchants, help the workers. It's not their fault that their government is doing some of these things, but it would be to everyone's disadvantage if everything falls apart.
Have you spoken to the president? What is his thoughts about the possible annexation of biblical Judea and Samaria in light of declaration of the Palestinian state?
We haven't had a specific conversation about that issue, but generally the president's attitude has been, not just with Israel, but with countries around the world, you're a sovereign nation, you make your own decisions, and unless you're out there killing people, he certainly tried to intervene in Russia, Ukraine. He's been very successful in intervening in some of the issues around the world, bringing countries together that have been at war for 35 years. He's been remarkable at that. But just like he said to Saudi Arabia when he was there, we're here to do economic development with you. We're not going to tell you how to govern your country. That's for you to decide, and it's not our job to tell you that the way you're doing it is wrong. That would be his message pretty much to anyone, including Israel. It's a sovereign nation. They'll make their own decision.
I'd just like to ask, I think from we talked about mainstream media and whatnot, the battle in the UN. the revocation of the visas for leaders of Palestine. A lot of pressure now being put on them to change their minds. I assume you would say, no, keep Rubio did the right thing.
When the Secretary made the decision, we found out about it on Friday evening here. It was made earlier in the day, Washington time, of course. And, you know, it was quite a significant decision, because it wasn't just not granting new visas to people that wanted to go to the UN, but it was revoking the visas that existed. It was a clear message to be sent that we have told you repeatedly, we, the United States, Secretary's been explicitly clear about this, don't do this ridiculous conference in September where you're going to go and you have this showboat moment of pretending you're going to declare a Palestinian state. But they've been pushing on with it anyway. And I think the U.S. decided, okay, you want to continue what you want to do? Well, we'll play our end of the game. You don't get a visa to come. I think it was the right decision based on the fact that you had a stubbornness pushing for something that isn't going to happen, that has been incredibly harmful, that's being done in the midst of a war going on, and you're essentially trying to punish Israel, who is trying to defend itself and to trying to bring an end to a hostage crisis that's gone on far, far too long.
On a scale of 1 to 10, how would you rate the UN as it pertains to anti-Israel bias, 1 being the lowest, 10 being the highest?
10 being the highest bias.
Bias against Israel.
I give them a plus 30. I'd say they're off the charts. It's insane how anti-Semitic the UN has become. I don't understand it. It makes no sense to me. They ought to be thrilled that Israel is a place where there is a democracy, where people can not only vote in an election and elect their leaders, but they can criticize their government, and nobody's going to come to their home tonight and shoot them in the head because they disagreed with the government. Try that in this neighborhood and other countries around and see how effective it is to be engaged in a protest and shut down traffic because you don't like something the government is doing. Israel ought to get a little credit for being a country where free speech continues to live and elections actually determine who leads the country. And instead, they get condemned by organizations like the UN. Makes no sense.
I'll wrap up with this. As you know, prayers have been going on for 2 years, free the hostages, end the war. Those prayer warriors out there, what word do you have of encouragement for them to stay the course? And how could they go deeper in their prayer time to really see change here? The Scripture tells us to pray for the peace of Jerusalem. And I would say that there's a reason that that's in the Scripture, because we should pray for the peace of Jerusalem. If there's peace in Jerusalem, there'll be peace around the world. And people should not quit praying, and they should not think that it is in vain, because it never is. And prayer will change things, but prayer also always changes the person who is praying. That's why we pray. Yeah, most people view this as a battle between Hamas and Israel. There's something much deeper going on. How do you see it?
Yeah, I think that if you really look at this stepping back, you don't see just a geopolitical conflict. What you see is a spiritual conflict. This is a battle of the ages. This is not horizontal. It's not left, right, liberal, conservative. This is a vertical battle. It's heaven versus hell. It's good versus evil. People need to see it in that context or they'll miss the whole thing. What Hamas did was a level of evil, the likes of which you just look throughout all history and would be hard-pressed to find anything like it. Where does that come from? It doesn't come just from socio-political or economic pressures. It comes from an evil that originates from the most demonic forces that have ever been unleashed on this earth. And that's why I feel like particularly Christian believers in the United States and across the world need to recognize it. You don't stand with Israel because you agree with their government or everything. You stand with Israel because Israel is standing for a tradition of the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and for the law, for the light, for the foundation of Western civilization itself, and to stand for those who would wish to annihilate not just every Jew, but every Christian. which is the ultimate goal of people like Hamas, you got to pick a side. This is not something where it's, well, this side, but this side. Pick a side, because you can't straddle this fence. You just can't.
Pastor Huckabee, thanks so much for taking the time for us today.
Paul,
Appreciate
thank
it.
you. Great to have you here.
All right.